Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. It is such an honor to moderate this session of the World Rainforest Day Summit. My name is Evin Cheikosman. I'm a policy analyst for the World Economic Forum's Crypto Impact and Sustainability Accelerator, also known as CISA, which among several Web3 research topics, we explore how crypto and blockchain technologies can more broadly contribute meaningfully to global environmental sustainability and help other industries to reach their climate goals more effectively. So I'm joined today, of course, by a remarkable panel. We have Lucia Gallardo, founder and CEO of Emerge. We have Lauren Serota, co-founder of the Crypto Research and Design Lab, also known as CRADL. We also have Jonathan Klein, president of Tresorio Cloud. So welcome all.
Hi. Thanks, Evin.
So in honor of the World Rainforest Day, we are here to not only talk about mechanisms to reduce Web3's environmental impact, but we also want to talk about some of the opportunities that this new exciting space presents to how we can think about climate action. So I wanted to just kind of get us started with a bit more context on the topic, and then we can kind of get into some questions from our panelists. So as all of you who are tuning in today may or may not know, we lose about 137 acres of rainforest every minute. And to conceptualize this a bit, that is more than 2 football fields every second. This is having a devastating impact on biodiversity, indigenous livelihoods, climate change, and global water cycles. And this trend, unfortunately, is likely to accelerate, which is pushing us to think about ways in which we can really meet that acceleration with innovative solutions. And this is where Web3 comes to play and is why, for many reasons, we're here to talk about this topic. New technologies like crypto and blockchain, for example, which enable rapid and transparent sharing of information and funds across borders with no government interference, offer these breakthrough opportunities that can really encourage and enforce rainforest preservation and the protection of endangered species, which of course is something that we all really want to see happen, right? So, and although these technologies are of course relatively young and in its early stages of development, there are numerous entrepreneurs from, of course, Jonathan, who we have here today. We have, of course, there are folks from Region Network and Moss and Reseed, just to name a few people that are doing really amazing work in this space that have begun to really explore its potential applications in our Earth's rainforest. So today we're really going to start to discuss what those opportunities are. We're going to engage in a thought experiment that takes us into a forward-looking and proactive approach into how we can essentially build an environmentally friendly and conscious Web3 future. So with that, I wanted to start off with just an initial question for each of our panelists. Lucia, perhaps we can start with you. We can go to Lauren and Jonathan. Would you like to just kind of start off with how each of your respective organizations are really thinking about Web3's climate impact? What are some of the things that you're doing to perhaps mitigate the potential risks associated with Web3's environmental footprint as well?
Totally. I think, I wear 2 hats, as a lot of people that are familiar with RP would know, or 3 hats, I guess, because I also sit on the board of Rainforest Partnership, who is the founder of World Rainforest Day. But I run Emerge, which is a technology design lab that focuses on impact, but a more holistic view on impact. It's not specific to climate, but really about all of the ways in which we think about sustainable development, from environmental well-being to social and economic well-being as well. So a lot of our projects do have a lot of considerations for the environment within that. The project that, I am here to talk about, because it's World Rainforest Day and because we are big supporters of Rainforest Partnership's work in biodiversity hotspots across Latin America, is called the Æternals, which is it's a Web3, it's a 10K NFT collection. It is connected in real time to the rainforest. So if it's raining in the Amazon, it's raining in your NFT. It's connected to the skylight and to the sound as well. So you get to really experience an immersive look into a rainforest. And what it's done is it's really gamified supporting rainforest protection as a cause. So the plot itself, it metamorphosizes. It grows the more that you contribute to rainforest protection, whether that's by donating to Rainforest Partnership, whether it's by playing our game or meditating with it, whether it's by participating in community events to learn about rainforest science or conservation practices, or to connect with some of the local communities that are doing the work on a regular basis. However it is that you contribute to this cause, your NFT reflects that. And when you stop contributing to the cause, the NFT actually regresses and it goes back to its basic state. So it serves almost like a proof of impact or a badge of honor for how you're contributing to rainforest protection as a cause. 55% of the proceeds are going to Rainforest Partnership so that they can continue their work in these biodiversity hotspots. But we obviously, as a project in Web3, we know that there's a lot of computing power that takes that goes into these kinds of projects. So we took 3 steps to very actively think about our environmental footprint on this project. The first one, which I'm really excited about, is that we partnered with Jonathan's company, Tresorio, in order to use some of their servers that are with a better power mix than oil and gas, as most projects in the NFT space right now are rendered in the US. We are actually rendering in France with an energy mix of primarily hydroelectric and nuclear, which already lowers our carbon footprint. But then also, which I'm sure Jonathan will dive into, we've been recycling our heat and using it to supply hot water to social housing units across France. And the trapping of the heat also lowers carbon emissions. So Jonathan and I will dive into that a little bit through our collaboration. The second thing that we did was we built our own custom layer 2 to handle all of the transactions that sort of govern what state the NFT is presenting to you. So obviously it's continuously evolving, and we needed something that would be less draining and using less computing power in order to govern those transactions. So we built a custom layer 2 specifically to manage that. And then the third step that we did is that we built in a perpetual uncapped royalty of 1% of every single transaction of sale for these NFTs to purchase carbon offsets. So whatever we're not able to minimize, we're able to offset. So ultimately what we're hoping is that we are able to become a carbon negative project relatively quickly. And then after that, continue to offset projects in Web3 in perpetuity. So we're particularly proud of how intentional we've been about this. We're actively measuring our impact on an environmental front in several ways. We've got our own custom-made impact measurement framework we're sharing with the community for any Web3 project or any person really that wants to understand what the technology footprint of, collections or projects that are primarily digital and what that footprint might look like when we're directing it to a good cause might have a bad footprint in the way that we built it. So we've been very intentional about trying to lessen that footprint and also share how we've done that so that others can do the same.
Wow, thank you so much, Lucia. I mean, applause, applause, applause. That's fantastic. I mean, there's certain things that I definitely want to circle back on, this whole concept around utility NFTs, impact-driven NFTs, just kind of what's going on in this space more broadly when we're thinking about this and some of like the reframing that we need to do. So it's really amazing that that's something that you're pushing forward, especially with Jonathan. Lauren, would love to go next to you.
Yeah, so the Crypto Research and Design Lab is actually in an interesting space because we're essentially a resource for the industry. So we're a research lab focused on specifically social sciences and ethnographic research, but we do conduct a bunch of other research. And most of us are anthropologists, policy analysts, designers by trade. And so we really take a critical look at a bunch of different angles of what's happening in the industry. And so our objective is to really hold a mirror to what's happening in the industry to say, are you asking the right questions? Are you engaging with the right players? Do you understand what you need to do on the ground to be environmentally, socially responsible? And what we've been doing is producing a series of reports and other traditional research outputs, but also design interventions. And so we recently partnered with CoinDesk, and we've kind of redesigned the hackathon that's associated with Consensus, their kind of keystone event for the year, and reframed it. Instead of it being a hackathon that's around solving a technology problem, it's a hackathon that's revolving around solving a bunch of different social issues, one of them being kind of environmental sustainability and well-being. So forcing the attendees and the participants to think not just technically, what chain am I going to build on, and like how am I going to solve this problem best technically, but more importantly, what problem am I solving? Do I understand it? Am I the right person to solve this problem, or the right team? And with whom should we partner so that we're actually ensuring that we have impact and our project is appropriately and effectively implemented. And so we've been working in spaces like that. And one of the things that we did at Consensus actually was program an entire track of content around that to both ask difficult questions of those in the industry, whether they be protocols or organizations that claim to be trying to have a positive impact or reduce their footprint or have a less impactful or a less environmentally impactful protocol, to highlighting stories that we found have kind of made it through our levels of detection that are actually doing things on the ground, that are engaging with the communities they're aiming to serve, and that are actually kind of proving that they have impact in a really measurable way, and thinking not just about utilization of their products, but also like long-term kind of environmental and social impact. And so examples of those, we've, Evin, you mentioned Regen Network. So we had Gregory Landaway, who's building a platform for any kind of regenerative asset to be verified, sold, resold, monitored, which is really interesting. There are obviously tons of different biological asset marketplaces that are emerging, whether it's a biodiversity market or tons of carbon credit markets. But the way that he's doing it is quite different, because he's focused on really the hyper-local needs of different project developers and the different kind of attributes that different types of assets should take to make sure that they're actually having the right regenerative impact on the ground. And keeping in mind that that will be very different if it's for a plot of rainforest that's being converted over from pasture land in the Atlantic forest, for if it's a savanna or a grassland somewhere in the middle of the United States. Or just more regenerative kind of cattle or livestock practices. So each of those things has unique needs that depend on the socio and kind of geographic considerations of the region, and those are all things that are being considered, which is just not something that you see in a lot of other instances of marketplaces that are being built. And so a couple of other examples that come to mind of folks that we had, Claudio Perinello from Planet Watch, who's building a completely distributed sensing network for starting with air quality, but eventually for water quality. And what's so exciting about this is it's not just about building a sensor network and then kind of monetizing and productizing the data out of that, but it's actually about creating a circular economy so that those who are actually implementing these sensors can benefit from the sale of the data. And so it's, creating, I think this is really the spirit of some of these technologies coming through in their implementation. Rather than, I think there are some examples of blockchain technologies just being implemented into traditional use cases or kind of traditional governance models. And so what we're trying to do is show a little bit of the spectrum, but really shine a light on, is this really doing something different, or is this doing kind of the same thing in a different way?
We're definitely going to circle back on that. There's so many different topics, because it was so great to actually be in the room and listen to you kind of like having these conversations with, Claudio and Gregory. And, you had this amazing woman that was working on like water cycles and like water conservation and whatnot. It's just so great to kind of like be able to kind of tee out more of those details, and especially as an example for other folks that are trying to navigate this space and think of ways that they can be contributory in a meaningful way, right? So Jonathan, over to you. Would love to hear what's kind of going on in your space.
I started Tresorio in 2016 at a cloud mining company. We were one of the first in Europe. And we understood at that moment that the IT infrastructure has a big problem. This is the heat management. All the data centers are making huge investments and are using a lot of energy just to cool the computing servers. And we don't see it. It's not a pollution that we can see. So few are understanding that the scale of a problem is gigantic. And at that time, we was in France. So we have a very clean energy mix based on nuclear, based on hydroelectricity. So we have one of the cleanest electricity in the world directly at the plug. But IT systems are not gobbling electricity. They are just moving electrons in electronic circuits. And after that, you have heat. It's all heat. So we work to create a micro data center that recycle all heat generated by computing resources. And we made a partnership with Dalkia Group, which is a major energy consulting firm, to place our micro data center inside various types of buildings like hospitals, social housings, factories. We are all consuming hot water, so we can place them everywhere. And that way we can create a distributed virtual data center that can support crypto mining, 3D rendering, that can host website, store data, and that way we are building a very efficient way to scale the infrastructure that the Web3 need and all the cloud. So we are also creating software solutions to ease the access to our computing power for creators, developers, miners. And we are just launching our first digital boiler for household. So now you can heat your home with Bitcoin mining. So it's also a great solution against the energy crisis, because purchasing power is rapidly decreasing under the electricity price pressure, and we need a new way to find solution for these problems, and we can cross ideas from IT, from emissions, and create new way to about this problem.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I love that the theme that we're seeing here is really trying to take these narratives and switch them on their heads, right? Changing how people think and how they perceive this industry, and sort of understanding what those capabilities are, and really pushing people to kind of go past their defenses when they think about what this industry means and how we can essentially look at traditional structures for sustainability approaches, and, you know, being more open to that. So would love to kind of tee those out a little bit from you, especially Jonathan. But Lucia, would love to go to you, because you mentioned so many cool things happening with Æternals. And of course, we are in this space going back to narratives, where of course there is excellent work being done by Æternals and other projects around NFTs trying to help conserve the rainforests that we have on this earth. And of course, there are other projects that aren't necessarily doing that work, and perhaps putting out a bad name for what those capabilities are when we think about NFTs and whatnot. So would love to kind of hear your perspective on how you're navigating those nuances, and perhaps any advice that you have for folks that are trying to enter this space in that way.
Totally. I think for us, the first step was really to understand what the ethos and the philosophy of the project was going to be. By partnering with Rainforest Partnership, we were making a commitment not just to the organization itself, but also to the communities that they work with in Peru and Ecuador and Mexico. And so we adopted a lot of the philosophy of how they view conservation into our project. So an example of that is, philosophically speaking, we view, and they view, rainforest as a public good. It's not intended to be owned. It's not intended to be sponsored, adopted, whatever. There shouldn't be a sense of ownership over a lot of this land. It is a public good. And in fact, you know, even if you've never set foot in a rainforest, on average, every 7th breath you take, regardless of where you are in the world, is enabled by a rainforest. So ultimately, what we're really thinking about is, how do we decouple this idea that you taking care or contributing to the cause of rainforest conservation means owning or sponsoring or adopting a plot? And how do you reimagine what that connection to the rainforest is to something that is a lot more regenerative and a lot less consumptive or extractive? And so when we were designing the project, one of the things that kept coming up was, okay, if you buy, you know, an Æternals NFT, do you get land with it? And our answer immediately was no. No, you do not. What you get instead is the opportunity to evolve your NFT by contributing to the cause. So we wanted impact to be the core value contributor to like the way that your asset manifests. And so we did decouple that. And I know that a lot of projects are on that, in that realm of NFTs, you know, mean that you have adopted a plot. That's not our ethos. So we were very careful and conscious about that. I constantly end up on panels with projects that do this approach. And my team now has like a running joke about how I like kind of have to exercise a lot of patience about it, because to me, that's just really important that we understand the value that rainforests offer the world, and that it is a collective, you know, responsibility to take care of them. And it's a collective effort that we need to make in order for these kinds of new financial instruments like NFTs to come in and sort of support that work in a way that is respectful of the true, you know, values of what we want to care for in terms of how we want to care for the forest. So the first thing we did was to understand, okay, who are we really working with? What is the value of the, like, what are the values of the organization that we're working with, in this case, Rainforest Partnership, and how do we build a project that really reflects that? The second thing was to understand what kind of impact we wanted to have. NFTs, you know, I know for people that don't know, it's really just a digital asset that's traceable. And this asset can be virtually anything. It could be, you know, an identity. It could be a video. It could be a picture. It could be text. It could be, you know, like a identifier for a physical good. Like if we're tracing, you know, a luxury bottle of wine, or you're tracing some very rare, you know, shoes, or it doesn't matter. Like the asset itself doesn't matter. What you're building as an NFT is the chain of custody and the traceability of transactions that revolve around this asset. So in knowing that an NFT can be anything, we really had to think creatively about what we wanted our NFT to be and what we wanted it to reflect. So in this case, we focused on a couple of different things. The first thing was that we wanted to make it multidimensional. For us, it was about how many ways can you use an NFT? You can gamify it. You can use it as meditation support if you want to turn on the rainforest sounds and sort of enjoy the experience that's immersive and makes you feel like you're in a rainforest. We wanted you to be able to play with it, so you can plug it into a game environment that we've built, and you can explore your plot, help it grow. You can release butterflies into it. You can sort of have a lot of fun with just exploring nature itself and connecting with the kinds of wildlife you would see in a rainforest. We wanted it to be a you know, utility as a community. So we wanted you to feel part of a movement. So we created a community that's mostly on a platform called Discord. And we have events. Rainforest Partnership contributes regularly with rainforest science, with information about their projects and their impact. We have our most popular channel, which I still can't believe, is called Show Me Your Plant or something like that. And basically, the community sort of helps each other take care of plants, identify what they might need or what's happening with them, and how to better take care of them. We've got all sorts of channels on like conscious living. So it's really, you know, building a community. And then we wanted some like random utility. So for example, when you are in a very high state of evolution, you enter these random giveaways where we give away once in a lifetime benefits. So the first benefit that we announced was that the person that wins that giveaway will have the right to name a recently discovered species in the rainforest. It'll be the official name of a frog species that Rainforest Partnership so graciously donated to this project. And we're very excited about that. So utility and this idea of what kind of impact and experience do you want your community to build around? And then the last step of that is figuring out how to organize community in that direction. How do you get them interested in this project? How do you get them to understand, you know, what an NFT is, how it can be, you know, impactful, and how you can be directly impactful with it, and what the value is of collecting it. And then once we sort of had figured out what this project was going to be, the next question, and I think it's a very important question for anyone looking to enter or like explore opportunities in Web3, is how are you going to build it? What is the way in which you're going to be intentional about, you know, your environmental efficiency, about the way that you're inclusive with your team, about the way that you're going to measure the impact that your project is actually having, about the way that you're going to predict potential unintended consequences. So really, we were methodical about, you know, we have this vision, how are we going to build it? And so we brought together a team of about 32 people at this point, and they're all contributing something different, whether it's technology, marketing experience, PR, whether it's community building, gaming experience, art and creative storytelling, etc. Everyone's contributing to it. And then we've gone out into the world and found amazing partners like Tresorio and Nifty Gateway to just sort of help us carry the project through. So it hasn't been an easy project to build, but I think the reason why it's become so complex is really because we saw the potential that NFTs had and really wanted to push and explore that. But realistically speaking, much simpler projects can be launched. And if you are an organization that, you know, is interested in new financial instruments, in exploring economic models for funding your work, in looking at incentives and how to get communities more actively involved over the long term for your project, then thinking about the way that Web3 is self-organizing into these communities that care about things, I think that's massive potential. And I'm super excited to see just how open a lot of our organizations are to these opportunities in the way that something like, you know, the way that Rainforest Partnership has been with us. So I'm super optimistic and excited about how Web3 is contributing to impact, but when done very intentionally and thoughtfully.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And I definitely want to go to you, Jonathan, because we heard so much about multidimensionality around Web3 impact and reimagining what that looks like and really putting communities at the core of how we think about those design approaches. So I want to pose that question to you to kind of get your perspective. I know there's so much going on at Tresorio right now, and you're doing this collaboration with Lucia, of course. But before we kind of get into that, Lucia, I wanted to come back to you on something. We have quite a few viewers right now, and a lot of people are viewing in, you know, Twitter and whatnot. Where should people go? Like, how can people participate and be a part of this and contribute? And, you know, what are some things that people can kind of, you know, latch on to really be a part of this?
Yeah, I mean, Web3 lives on Twitter, right? Twitter is such a great place to find information about Web3. So we have a Twitter account called the Æternals. It's THEAE Eternals. And the account, honestly, like, we post everything about how we're building. We love to build in public. What we really want is organizations to take what we're doing and do it for whatever cause they care about in whatever way they can. So we are open about what technology we're using. Today, we ran a session on how to build this kind of project. How do you organize it? What kinds of teams do you need, and expertise and skills do you need? So we're very open about, you know, how to do this. We have our impact measurement that's publicly available as well. What are we measuring? You know, we've got some statistics with Tresorio. We co-launched. We did a Twitter storm about, you know, what the impact of the project is going to be on the rendering side. But we also have a few other things that we're measuring, such as the diversity and geographic representation of our team. And also, just like each one of our teams is actually monitoring their own statistics. So we had someone work with me to design a measurement framework to ensure that each of our teams is reporting the impact that they're having, how much computing power they're using, et cetera. So, you know, we're doing all of this in public. It's on Twitter, and we're very happy to welcome people into our community, into the Discord. We are posting tons of information there. We have a questions channel where people can come in and just ask whatever questions they want from us. And our all hands, like our team meetings, are actually held in public. So every week our team gets together and we do a round of updates, and this is all held in public to make sure that people sort of see exactly what kinds of conversations go into building a project like this. So it's all out in the open, and you know, just follow us on Twitter and jump into our community. And we're so happy to help and happy to connect you with our partners like Jonathan. Happy to also provide some of our mistakes and lessons learned so that you are spared those lessons. And just, you know, to move back and forth, because what we really wanted when we launched this, honestly, it was an experiment when we launched it. It was to set a precedent for what impact could be and could look like in Web3. And so to us, like, there's no greater joy than seeing like people take what we've started and run with it for their own causes or for their own projects or for their own visions of rainforest conservation.
Thank you so much. And those tuning in, you heard that right. I mean, definitely get involved and step in. This is a really just exciting way to be able to be a part of something that's really doing impact the right way. So Jonathan, going back to you, really want to pose that question that Lucia was rising up in this discussion. How are you reimagining impact and building your community around that? You know, you were talking about how you're changing up how people think about mining and using that in how people, you know, live, and using that sustainably and trying to kind of changing up how people think about crypto mining and energy consumption. So would love to kind of hear some of those examples that you could provide for us in the audience.
Yeah, I think the internet is wonderful because it brings people closer to each other, and it gives us a sense of a species. We are all members of the same species, and we are all on the same planet. So the internet has let us understand what happens at 3,000 miles away, and we can now show people very efficiently what human can do, and we can create proof of concept like the Æternals, like what we are doing at Tresorio, and we can show the world that things can be done better, and that's the impact we want to have, because we have a lot of information, and it's very hard to see what is greenwashing, what is really having an impact. So we need strong proof of concept, and what we are doing at Tresorio is exactly that. If we can prove that the digital world can expand efficiently, and the positive externality, the heat, for example, today it's a waste, it's a negative externality of the cloud and of the Web3. Tomorrow, if we recycle the heat, it will be a positive externality, and we will not have all the drama we have now around the energy consumption, because the system is flawed at the beginning, and that's why we have the drama. If we can rethink how we create all this complicated system, with in mind that we have to integrate the system very efficiently and for the greater good, we can change the world, really. And the Æternals is the perfect project to show this, because some of us can say, hey, we don't need it, we just don't need it, so please don't do it for the planet. And we are proving that if the Æternals didn't exist, we will have more CO2 emissions at the end, because we will have a natural gas boiler producing hot water for buildings in France instead of our system that is much more efficient than a natural gas boiler, and our electricity is has a lower carbon footprint than natural gas or diesel fuel. So we can prove that evolution is and can be in the digital space for the greater good.
No, thank you so much, Jonathan. And Lauren, I wanted to bring you in on this, right? Because, you know, we're talking a lot about how these different sustainability approaches and impact approaches are affecting communities. And, you know, that's a big part of what CRADL does, right? And that was also a big element of the conversation when we were talking about the Web3-a-thon, which you gave a really great synopsis of earlier. But because of so much of the great work that CRADL's doing, I would love to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of talk to us a little bit more about how you're working with communities, especially at the intersection of environmental well-being, and some of those insights that were pulled from those conversations from the Web3-a-thon, and how you kind of hope that those things can kind of push forward. What are you kind of hoping for the potential there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I want to zoom out a little bit by first talking about something that Jonathan just mentioned, which is the drama around the energy consumption of this technology. I'm thankful for this drama. Let me tell you why. So 12 years ago, Greenpeace released a report when the iPad came out about the consumption and the abstraction of the environmental impact of cloud computing. Nobody was blinking an eye, right? I felt like I was yelling from mountaintops saying, you know, how are we, because I've spent my career in design, so I know that if somebody is a couple steps removed from something, it's so much easier for them to abstract it out of existence and for them to not feel accountable to kind of the results of their decisions as a consumer, as a user of a product, et cetera. And so this to me was a huge warning siren, right? That these things were happening and they were happening so detached from, as a result of, but detached from the products and services we were using because of cloud computing becoming so pervasive. And so I am actually thankful that there's so much attention with this new technology around the environmental impact, because it has forced the industry to have these conversations and to innovate and to utilize a lot of technologies that have existed that are a lot more sustainable, whether they're renewable energy sources or kind of additional ways to offset, reduce, sequester the energy usage from as part of the life cycle of a product. And so I'm thankful for it, because I think that that's kind of the first step in any meaningful change happening is awareness. And that this is the transparency that's baked into the Web3 universe has forced us into that. So I think, it's frustrating. And I know, Evin, you've written about this pretty extensively. But what it forces is it forces us to demonstrate to the world the utility of this in the same way that we understood the utility of cloud computing and the utility of, as you pointed out in one of your pieces, Evin, like electric clothes dryers, right? When we associate enough utility with a technology, and we have a balanced understanding of what the environmental impact of it is, we can have real conversations about those trade-offs. And right now, there isn't enough broad perceived utility around these technologies. And so I think that that's an exciting part of the conversation, is making that a little bit more applicable. And that's honestly a lot of what we're focusing on at CRADL. You'd mentioned Charlene Lurig, who was a woman who was on our panel at the Web3-a-thon, and she works for the Texas Water Trade and is extremely important in Texas from like a watershed protection, clean water access, and water sustainability perspective. And she really came into the Web3 world through consensus in these conversations. And I think that what's important is for us we talk a lot about the technology, but we need to think about who is doing work outside of the Web3 ecosystem, who's doing work that's impactful and would benefit from these technologies, and then where will the technologies fit in existing use cases. So I think it's both like, who's participating, how can we broaden who's participating and invite more people in? And to do that, we need to talk less about the technology and more about what it's doing and for whom. So I think that that's really what we're trying to facilitate, is more of a place to talk about like what problems are being solved, the social impact they're having, the environmental impact, obviously, and then how those problems are being solved. Lucia, you talked about kind of all of the different ways that you're looking at impacting your organization, from the diversity of your team and their suitability to solve the problems that y'all are addressing, to how you're rendering your NFTs. So that the how is just as important, but really we're kind of only looking at a very sliver if we're just talking about the people who are right now working in blockchain and understand the utility of it. So that's really kind of where we've been focused with CRADL, is elevating the stories and the visibility of organizations that are already doing this work, and helping them understand where the technology does and does not fit into what they're doing or trying to do in the future. And then the organizations that are already working in the space, asking them tough questions about how they're engaging with the communities, how they're measuring impact, how their organization is or is not reflective of the communities they're serving. And so that's where some of the questions and the things that we're doing around Web3-a-thon, around some of our other research, are starting to bubble up.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to bring out what Lauren is talking about in terms of like who is building and diversifying that talent, because I think that's so important. And the reason why we did start measuring that was specific because we just took a second to reflect on like the 32 people that came together to build our project. And there were like people that were in their like Gen Z, 19, 20-year-olds. Like one of our artists is a 20-year-old. We've got a couple people that are actually in like the boomer, like 50-year-olds on the team as well. So it was just kind of like we took a second and like did a round of updates, and we're like, look at this team. And, from all over the world, we actually have representation from Southeast Asia. We've got a lot in Latin America, some based in Colombia, like very close to rainforest environments that, they grew up around. I personally grew up near a rainforest. So there's a lot of love for the fact that this is the first time a couple of them are even participating in a Web3 project. We did pull a lot of people from like, you know, a creative storyteller who teaches at Parsons. Like she became our like head of, you know, creative storytelling and really helped develop the voice of the Æternals. And I think that that's super special. And, you know, she's a single mom. She had never touched a Web3 project in her life, and now is minting her own artwork. You know, and so it's been really fun to just sort of see how the team has come in and grown, and just the skill sets that they develop by merging their skill set outside of Web3 and just connecting with the opportunities that are found within the space, not just on the technology front, but also on the economic front, on the social front, and just on the community level, like to be able to tap into what are really like self-organizing communities around things that they care about, whether, you know, it's art NFTs or impact NFTs or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's just a new way of organizing people. And it's a new way of organizing the economics around value, whether that value is, you know, artistic, whether that value is technological, whether that value is a product or a service or an experience. It doesn't really matter. The opportunities in Web3 are very broad in those categories of like organizing communities and then redefining and reworking the like the dynamics around value creation and reward. And so I think that that's really, really special. And then the other thing I wanted to tap into that you're mentioning, which I think, well, both of you have mentioned, is this idea of this narrative that, you know, Web3 is killing the planet. There is a running joke on my team because it sets me off anytime someone like sort of says that that Ethereum is killing the planet or something like that. It's like a set off for me. I immediately dive into that because I do agree that in a way it's good because it's challenging us to sort of really think about the environmental footprint of our own sector. But I think what it's also doing is giving us an opportunity to sort of say, this is not an issue that is unique to blockchain. There is computing power across board. That is, you know, this conversation that we're having today is using computing power. Everything basically today does that touches any digital realm, right? And so the idea that like the conversation goes beyond blockchain and it needs to have us reflect a little bit about, you know, how much computing power are we really using? For what reason? I can guarantee you that the traditional finance sector, if you aggregate all of it from mobile banking to ATMs to bank branches to headquarter offices to the, you know, stock market to so on and so forth, together have an infinitely larger footprint than the blockchain space does. And yet nobody's really saying, hey, what about the traditional banking sector? So it is a very like villainizing narrative for Web3, but it is giving us an opportunity to sort of talk about the grander conversation of saying, actually, it's a computing power situation. And there are many, many damaging industries that are using too much computing power and not thinking, you know, about using solutions like Tresorio to rethink how they might be, you know, contributing that computing power into carbon emissions or into more damaging effects for the environment. So I think you're right in that it's a good thing because it's allowed us to have that conversation. But I think it's really important for our sector to stand up and say, this is not an issue that's unique to blockchain. This is a global issue. And the more that we digitize, the more it's becoming a bigger and more global issue that we all sort of need to address and tackle. And I think, you know, traditional finance sector has a huge footprint. And on top of that, they're primarily based in like oil and gas based economies. So then what ends up happening is they have to be bribed with taxpayer money to be able to like actually invest in programs for corporate social responsibility or to meet some ESG targets. And here you have an entire ecosystem in Web3 that's self-organized into looking for solutions using, you know, stranded energy and solar and aeolic energy as primary sources of energy across the Bitcoin and Ethereum networks. And all of this was done without a single incentive or bribe. So I feel like we have it in our ethos as a community and a sector to really look toward building more environmentally efficient, just inherently because of who we are as a community. And I think that that's what excites me about the potential for really thinking about what the future of Web3 is going to look like on an environmental footprint level.
No, I love what's happening here. And Lauren, I want to go to you, and I also want to go to Jonathan and get some reactions, because it's not about putting a value judgment. It's not about having this conversation around sort of like the morality of computing power and energy consumption. If we want to talk about morality, Lucia, you mentioned the oil and gas sector and all of the subsidies going on there, and just sort of like the hypocritical narrative that's being crafted when it comes to Web3's capacity and energy consumption. So how do we kind of push past that and actually get to the work that needs to be done. And we don't have enough time to continue to deliberate back and forth on what is socially accepted or not. So Lauren, would love to get your perspective, and Jonathan as well.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is a very classic, this gap exists everywhere. And I've seen this trying to get somebody in a rural agricultural community to use a smartphone app. It costs too much data. I can't, right? Until something proves value to somebody, that there will be reasons that they don't use it, right? And so I think that Web3 needs to be useful for people, for them to overcome the narrative that they have of it's all rich white bros and it's horrible for the planet. Like, those are not difficult barriers to overcome as soon as they have a connection to something and it makes sense. And so I think that that's a really noble challenge for us. And I actually like the thing that's important is that this should extend beyond computational, usage. I mean, the people who are buying new smartphones every year, right, should understand where the mines are that are mining all the rare earth metals for their phone, so what the actual impact is that they're having for their other behaviors. And so I think that these will start to, I'm happy these conversations are happening for that reason. And I do think that it's not an apples to apples. And I would love, for example, for someone to actually try to subpoena Visa to do a life cycle assessment that everyone trusts of their environmental impact of their payment processing systems. That would be fantastic. But the truth is, they probably don't. It's probably highly complicated for them to do it because they weren't building to measure impact in the way that organizations are now. And so I think that it's just a fundamental shift. And it's a good shift because it is forcing everyone, everyone will now be programmed to pay attention to these things. And that's fantastic.
Love that. Jonathan, would love to bring you in on this. I heard so many reactions on your end. What's going on there?
I totally agree with Lauren, because as a new industry, we have to prove our value. And that's the perfect occasion to think of it better and to create a clean base for the industry. And I don't think the old industry, the banking industry or the ICT industry has a chance to do that at first. They just didn't know. And now we have, just take a look at the scale. French data centers are emitting enough heat each year to power 4 billion showers each year. This is an amazing waste, but they just can't use it. They are outside of cities. The temperature is not high enough. So they are stuck, and you can't do better with this system. So the Web3 industry can recreate models with much better mindset at first. And that's a unique opportunity. And we have to create this drama to force people to not only think about how many dollars they will make with their project, but also what impact really has the project. And that's just a wonderful opportunity.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I love that we're talking about, facing the drama head on, pulling siloed efforts across the industry, thinking proactively, recreating how we want impact to drive the worlds that we want to live in and the generations that are coming thereafter. This conversation is being so positive in its outlook, and I love that, but also taking into consideration some of those risks and how we're mitigating those risks and not creating more blind spots along the way, which I think is really important as well. So I know that we have just about 10 minutes left. I don't know where this time went, but I wanted to also touch a little bit upon governance. There's a lot of, trends and movement happening in this space. Of course, in the US, we had the Biden executive order that focused on a myriad of different components of digital assets, including climate change. And the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has announced that they're going to be putting out this policy recommendations paper out in August around cryptos, mining and energy consumption and whatnot. I mean, of course, I know that there's a lot going on the European side as well, Jonathan, but would love to get each of your perspectives and just any sort of advice that you would just love to give if you had those folks on this line right now.
I mean, it goes back to what we're trying to tackle head on, right? It's really understanding what does it mean to say we're going to ban mining in our city, and you know why, right? And again, it goes back to this understanding that there is a narrative that is driving a lot of these decisions in policy right now. A lot of that narrative revolves around energy consumption. It's a very incomplete narrative. There's, you know, considerations around what the power mix is, energy sourcing. There's considerations around how that harmonizes with like the social and economic well-being of communities. You have a lot of communities in the US and, you know, in countries that are perceived as economically developed or, you know, forward. You have a lot of people that are still continuing to be excluded from financial products and services. You have communities that might be able to access them, but certainly at punitive, in punitive ways. So, for example, they might have higher interest rates than other people, or they might not be able to access some of the products and services despite having like very basic ones like a bank account. And so when you think about the ways that there's inequity across board, banning something without properly understanding like the full impact of what Web3 actually has to offer, what digital money has to offer, I think that is definitely something that we need to raise more awareness of, that for us, it can't be like there's an ESG for a reason. Like it's not just the environmentalism component, which I know is ironic to say on a day that celebrates climate, but I think that it really what makes climate movements stronger is to factor in the considerations for the social and economic well-being of communities that we're trying to support, right? And I think that there's a lot of invisibility in what the benefits are of financially and socially including people within Web3 that are going unnoticed in a lot of the policy making. And so I think, you know, organizations like CRADL really can play a role in like connecting the dots for policymakers to sort of understand, you know, what these ramifications are when they decide to take a strong arm policy shift, like the one that was attempted in several states now, and is being attempted in different countries as well. And so I know Europe has been looking at also, you know, there was a potential ban on mining. It's happened in Asia. It's happening in the US. And so to really think critically about these kinds of policies, not just from a purely energy consumption perspective, but also just holistically about what we can do to actually regulate the power sources, what we could do to regulate the way in which energy is sort of shared across a grid, what we can do in order to ensure that people are able to access alternative finance solutions when the traditional finance sector does not serve them, and what are the ways in which we can build almost like closed loop life cycles that actually create more value for communities in the way that, you know, we are working with Tresorio to give hot water to social housing units in different areas of France. And so that's coming purely off of, you know, Web3 and computing power. And it's something that actually adds a ton of value to Web3. So I think it's just a matter of understanding policy making from a more holistic perspective. And it's our job, especially as organizations that continuously build using this technology, to really showcase you know, what it is that we can do in a more environmentally efficient way, but also to add nuance to the narrative around energy consumption and really add more complexity to where that energy is coming from and what that energy is being used for and what the value proposition of why that energy is consumed in the first place and what that can do for communities across any city, anywhere in the world.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And Lauren, I want to head over to you. And if you can actually include in your answer, maybe the response to this really great question we have in the chat. You know, policymakers, especially the folks at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, need those examples. They need those stories. They need to be able to see the impact happening, but those don't really, we don't have enough of those. There are so much happening, but how do we kind of conceptualize that for the folks that are, you know, have those strategic decisions at the table? What can you kind of provide there in terms of insight and recommendation?
Yeah, thanks. And actually, I mean, Lucia, I think addressed it well. That things are over legislated or banned when there's a lack of understanding. It's like a human response to say, like, hold on, we don't know enough to do this, right? And so I think it's important for us to remember that, and to remember that, like, it's our responsibility to be the educators in that case. Otherwise, we're going to have to work around that legislation or kind of deal with, you know, enforcement coming at us and then having to play defense. Right. And I think that that's what the tech industry has been doing, actually, for the past 15 years. If you look at how a lot of the big companies and the big players now operated, they came in, you know, like bullied their way in, not caring too much about, you know, the hotel lobby in, you know, the case of home sharing, and or the taxi medallion system in the case of ride sharing. That, I guess, can work if you're creating a giant centralized monster where you're going to have a team of lobbyists and advocates that are then shaping policy reactively once the kind of legislation comes back to govern you. We can do it a different way. And I think we ought to. And I think what you're describing, Lucia, is doing it a different way. But it means that there needs to be not just, hey, you're dumb because you don't understand this technology, or how can you not get it, all this potential, but saying, here's how we're using it, and having conversations, because it's really complicated. I mean, the fact that the three of us are on the same panel about a topic is just indicative of how early the industry is, right? Like, we're talking, we have three completely different areas that we're working in, but it's so new that it's all relevant because we're trying to shape something that has like kind of a shared common interest in positive, sustainable environmental impact, right? And so I think that like, one, those of us who are working in the space, remembering that we are stewards of it, and those stories, and being not just educators, but also listening and understanding the concerns is super important. And I think the best way to do that, again, Lucia and Jonathan, honestly, is through stories, through, you know, here's examples of how things are being implemented. Here's examples in, you know, going back to the hyperlocal theme, which we believe is super important in CRADL. Here's relatable examples to your jurisdiction, or to the place where you're governing. That could be applicable. Here's people who are working in this space where there's something that's analogous that you could pull from. And so that's really a lot of what we've been working on at CRADL, is finding those examples of stories that aren't from some place that's so abstracted that you can't actually, you know, that a policymaker couldn't say, well, what does that mean for me and for my constituents? But where there's actually a way to say, okay, I understand how this could be beneficial. And help them understand that this isn't going away, right? Banning mining in one state doesn't mean that it's going to stop happening, right? And so it really, I see these as temporary measures that you know, that governments are putting on until they can figure out what's going on, until they can figure out how to make sure that they're making decisions responsibly.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. And also, before we move on to Jonathan, where can folks go to learn more about CRADL and actually read about those stories and get involved potentially?
Yes, thank you for asking. So right now you can go to CRADL.org, which is CRADL.org, which is the launching point for all of the content that we're putting out. But if you actually have an idea, if you're building in the Web3 space, or if you're Web3 curious and want to start learning about the technology, the Web3-a-thon, which is the hackathon that we put together with CoinDesk, is actually a 3-month hackathon, and it's a multi-chain hackathon, and it's completely different than a normal hackathon. It's actually more focused on product and use case. Please enter. So, and you can check out some of the use cases that we've talked about and some of the stories that I've shared today on that site as well, which is Web3-a-thon, exactly how you would imagine, .xyz.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren. And of course, you can follow each of our speakers on Twitter and get so much more information and updates on this space. But Jonathan, please, would love to get your closing thoughts on this topic as well.
The topic of regulation is a bit hard for me because on one hand, I had very hard times in Europe developing my activity. They just closed my personal bank account. The European Commission voted a few months ago on the mining ban. Not a ban, but it was almost the same. And they vote against the ban. But we are seeing that policymakers are struggling between lobbyists from the ICT industry, banking industry, personal belief also, and they don't see the value it all creates. And the one who sees it seems to have hard times to convince their pair. So I hope we will all see this as a big opportunity, because we haven't seen nothing yet. Mining, for example, could lead to a very different way of thinking data management. Today you have client and servers, and all of the back and forth, it consumes a lot of electricity. With Bitcoin mining, for example, you can make things totally different. You can have data that lives everywhere, available everywhere, and just stop this data transfer all around the globe and back and forth. So I hope they will see this.
No, thank you so much. That's an excellent way to close us out. And I will add, Lucia, did you want to say something?
No, I actually have to drop because I'm on the next panel as well. So I'm
okay.
on my next panel. But thank you so much to all of you and to everyone that was tuning in. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you so much. And for all of you who tuned in, Lucia, Lauren, Jonathan, this was a great conversation. And to all of you tuning in as well, thank you. And to Rainforest Partnership for hosting this great event. We really appreciate it. And just one piece of advice for those still tuning in, that I would encourage everyone to really continue to engage in a thought experiment that is more, forward-looking and solutions-oriented. And if you're getting into this space, you have great folks, especially on this line, that you can go to for, insights and to share stories and to kind of understand how to be more proactive and conscious about the impact that you're trying to drive. So thank you all so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, Jonathan. Bye, Evin.
Bye.
Bye.